We're going to start with the topic of who's most in trouble. The three of us, clearly, given the way that we've dressed. So this is an interesting one. Who's most in trouble between Arsenal, Manchester City, and Real Madrid? Or to slightly tweak it, Janusz, which of these three teams has done worse than what we expected them to do at this stage of the season? What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, if you put it that way, I suppose you have to go to Real Madrid. But I mean, I'm going to go right away, and I think the one that's in trouble most for me is Arsenal. So, I mean, I don't want to split the conversation. Obviously, the expectations were much higher for a team like Real Madrid, not just in La Liga, but in particular in Champions League. It's early going for sure, but I think if you look at the three before we even get there, I still think that, if you look at Real Madrid, they can still possibly win a trophy. I think Manchester City, a couple of points behind in the Premier League, and obviously I think they'll get their ducks in order. If I look at Arsenal, I don't want to get to the preview of Chelsea game, but I'll just say it that if they lose that game, I think that's them in terms of Premier League, even though it's early. I see Arsenal winning the Champions League.
Okay, LME, Arsenal have probably lost one of their key players, if not their main player, in Martin Odegaard. Man City haven't had Kevin De Bruyne. Phil Foden's kind of not been the Phil Foden we expect just yet. What's Real Madrid's excuse?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I went on Instagram, MD and Janusz, and our very own producer, Sam Price, took out his Commodore 64 and gave us this wonderful graphic here where we asked this question that you're posing. And I got to be honest, I agree with this on point. I see Janusz's conversation and argument regarding Arsenal because he's right. If Liverpool win against Aston Villa on Saturday, that's a 10-point gap between them and the Gunners. So you could have a conversation there regarding the project, and obviously Edu leaving as sporting director, that adds another headache. You mentioned Martin Odegaard, even though he's back, but Declan Rice now having forced to be played with a broken toe. We'll have to see what Arteta does that. But yeah, it's alarming for Arsenal, but I'm going to go with Real Madrid here because to your point, number one, we can talk about the points on both tables. Champions League is a little bit more adjusted. They can climb up at any given, midweek or whatever. And yes, even though Barcelona are killing it, they have a game in hand, Real Madrid. And yes, at this point, the gap is big. But to me, the crisis is deeper because simply there are issues here that won't be rectified overnight. Toni Kroos's absence is massive. At this point last season, Jude Bellingham had 13 goals. He has 0. Kylian Mbappe, even though he's scoring a little bit and getting an assist as well in the process, there's clearly a lack of cohesion amongst himself and Rodrigo and Vinicius Jr. and what's going on there. Courtois' injury is significant. Dani Carvajal as well. I think Tchouaméni played one of the worst games I've ever seen any midfielder play in the Champions League as well recently. There are massive concerns to me when it comes to just the stature and the objectives of a team as big as Real Madrid. And even though Carlo Ancelotti said today or yesterday in his press conference that we know the issues, and he said one of them was like, we're going to work hard and we're going to press and we're going to be together. To me, there are massive problems here for Real Madrid, and something needs to happen in order for them not just to be successful, but not just overnight, but in the long run. So to me, Real Madrid is the number one crisis point.
Okay, so we've had two different answers to that. Let's go in depth with the answers we've had and also with Manchester City to find out why they aren't there or they aren't where they expected to be. Let's continue with Real Madrid, Janusz, and from what LME has said, this started on day one at Mallorca, not tracking back. New signing, Kylian Mbappe, the best players in the world. They've struggled to put him in with Vinny Jr., with Rodrigo. Hendrick's there as well. Jude Bellingham's playing in a different position now. He's kind of playing in that Claude Makélélé role at times, and then they're expecting him to be a number 10. He's no longer the kind of main guy. So they've got one of the best managers in the world to maybe turn it around. So what does he need to do because they're 9 points behind Barca with still a game in hand, but it's not been what we expected so far. What's the magic resolution?
I think going back to fundamentals, and everybody's is talking about Vinny Jr. and Mbappe, can they play together? We have examples of big stars not being able to play together. If you look at PSG with Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe, so I'm not saying it can happen, but I wouldn't worry about that. The fundamentals are simply defensively, and not just the back four, but obviously, as you guys mentioned, the makeup of the midfield. Because I'm not going to go just to the fact that Toni Kroos is there. Is he the biggest miss? I think the biggest miss so far is, as Elmi said, Tchouaméni and Camavinga, because they're not up to par, and they've been there for a while, right? It's not the quality of that. We can argue that Camavinga has a range of play and he's got the ability to win the ball and he's got the energy and all that. But for Real Madrid, you need a little bit more than that, right? But I think, just from my playing days, and I don't think you have to play the game to know that it's a lot easier to fix your team defensively than it is to fix your team going forward. And I still believe what Real Madrid has going forward is enough. If Ancelotti starts trying things, and mainly, of course, maybe with Jude Bellingham, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Last year, Jude Bellingham looked fine in that number 9 role. Why not try that? I don't believe he's tried that this season. Maybe once and I've missed it. But so some of the things could fix themselves. But first and foremost, just make sure they don't concede. They are not as open as we saw in the last Champions League, because you could have done just about anything. The distances between formations and all of that. So that's why I still believe that Real Madrid can put that together. And I also do believe that I saw David Alba started to train. Obviously, he's been away for such a long time. I don't expect him to kind of just walk in and be himself again. But I also believe that Real Madrid will go to the transfer market in January because they simply have to.
Elmi, let's do a little bit of role playing here with something Janusz has just said. Let's put Bellingham at number 9. Okay, you've got Mbappe and you've got Vinny Jr., who both like coming in from the left-hand side. Can't have them both. So what has to happen here? Do they need to prioritize Bellingham as well as Vinny Jr. and then fit in Mbappe, where you can maybe put him coming in from the right or whatever? Because you've got to remember, there's very few teams that have had 3 stars all working well. Even the Barcelona stars, when Messi and Neymar were there, it was Luis Suarez that was kind of the add-on that was a big help, but he knew his position. So if we're putting Bellingham as a 9, where are we putting Vinny, or where are we putting the other one in this one, Kylian Mbappe?
Yeah, I'm putting Kylian Mbappe right now on the bench. I don't care about his stature. I don't care about his reputation right now. The most important thing is about Real Madrid, Carlo Ancelotti making sure that Real Madrid gets on course. And if the issues that Janusz rightly talks about, which is about making sure that the midfield is together, or at least there's more potency from Jude Bellingham, who, once again, I reiterate, has 0 goals right now, then you have to prioritize what works. Vinicius Jr., no matter what happens, is doing everything he can to push this Real Madrid side. So I'm sorry, Kylian Mbappe. I know that you're a big star, but this is your first season. We're trying to get adjusted to you here. I'm putting you on the bench. And then I'm allowing Vinicius Jr. to do his thing on the left-hand side, Jude Bellingham to come in as a 9, and then Fede Valverde can also push, and then hopefully that allows a little bit more fluidity. And by the way, a big issue for Real Madrid right now is what they do when they don't have the ball. And Kylian Mbappe is not necessarily the best at tracking back and covering. So let's focus right now on the simplicity of what you need to do. Put Mbappe on the bench, let Vinicius Jr. do his thing on the left, and then as games develop, and then maybe if you want to replace one or the other because of obviously how congested a schedule can be, then Mbappe comes in. Forget the name and reputation right now. Put Mbappe on the bench and prioritize Jude Bellingham and make sure that this team goes back to what they know best.
On you go.
Maybe even simpler than that, because there needs to be flexibility. You can easily fix. Look, first of all, it could be rotation. You didn't even mention Rodrigo, who was so good last season, and like Jude Bellingham. I mean, he's not playing. Bellingham at least playing out of position, but you can change the system very easily, right? You can go to 4-2-3-1. And it solves a little bit of problem, because at the moment in the midfield you have three midfielders that are not doing the job. So if three can do it, maybe two can protect the back four, and then all of a sudden you can play Mbappe as a lone striker and have support on the side. And I don't see this as a problem. We've seen that at Liverpool, right? I mean, Jurgen Klopp played 4-3-3. In comes Hansi Flick and plays what he's always played at Bayern Munich, 4-2-3-1, right? And guess what? All of a sudden, somebody like Robert Lewandowski, who last year Xavi wanted to get rid of, didn't play great. He wasn't terrible. Now he's on a tear. So there are a lot of things that you can do as long as you're willing to do it. And I do think that Ancelotti can.
Just one more data point, MD, very quickly. They've conceded 10 goals in the last 4 matches. So we can talk about this offensively as much as we want, but defensively, off the ball, they got to get their stuff together. And I can't stress this enough. Dani Carvajal's absence is massive, I think, as well, just from the leadership perspective as well. They just got to get it together.
Well, they've got to stop dropping points away from home. They've dropped 6 points. First one at Mallorca, and obviously they had Atletico Madrid as well. These are games that they were finding a way to win last season, and they haven't. So according to your graph, and according to us, or one of us certainly, Real Madrid are probably underachieving more than we expected out of these 3 teams. Manchester City, for me, Janusz, they're a side that don't mind being the chasers, because we've seen that. But the difference this season is they're chasing from closer than they have chased in the past. So it's a concern for Liverpool. But how different are they and what we've seen? Certainly defensively, because it's rare for them to keep a clean sheet, especially at the Etihad these days. How different are they without Rodri? And is it as simple as no Odegaard for Arsenal, then they're not the same? No Rodri for Man City, the Ballon d'Or winner, and they're not the same? Or does it go deeper than that?
Yeah, it coincided also recently with Ruben Dias not being there. We know how important he is. I think when he's back, if you look at Akanji and Aka's been away a lot, once you get that together, there's a lot to go to. I mean, the reason I didn't put Manchester City anywhere in there, in terms of the team that is the most trouble, is because they have so many difference makers. And I think once you recover some of these players, obviously Rodri is not going to be recovered. But again, I look at this team and okay, a bad spell. Nobody has an infinite right to win all the time. Manchester City or Real Madrid or anybody else, right? But I think you have to look at the players that can make a difference. And there are so many of them that, probably no reason for us to do that. In the midfield, obviously, Rodri is that one player that we say, whoa, what's going to happen? But, if I were Pep Guardiola, I would, without a doubt, maybe not now, for as long as Kovacic is playing, would play Gvardiol, who for me, if you look at his game, is like Rodri, right? I mean, strike from distance, can score goals, can cover ground. By the way they play, he comes in from the left-hand side, as Pep Guardiola's teams very often do, comes into the midfield anyway. So in emergency, I'd like to see him there longer term, because for me, he's made for that position. If you look at Rodri at the moment, so I don't see this as a problem for Manchester City. They're only 2 points behind Liverpool, who by the way are nearly perfect, right? And I think they'll eventually recover. Kevin De Bruyne is going to start playing. The only thing obviously is the charges, if something were to happen to that, and what happens with Pep Guardiola, right? If he's going to stay, we won't know it, but they'll know it inside, and that can play a big role.
3 defeats in a row, LME. It's one of those that the stats department at ESPN's already on it, as if to say, when was the last time Manchester City lost 4 games in a row? Now, one of them was in a League Cup. Okay, it was a very changed side. One of them was the Champions League in midweek at Sporting. They weren't great, but they made 1 or 2 changes as well. And obviously they had that defeat last week against Bournemouth. But that game recently against Southampton, when they won at home by 1-0, that was their first home clean sheet in the Premier League since March. So if it's not Rodri, then why the defensive deficiencies from City?
Yeah, Janusz mentioned Ruben Dias, and I agree. I think that's one component. But I gotta be honest, this is definitely from like a longer period of time, the worst I have seen Manchester City from a counter-attacking perspective. Like what they do the moment they lose the ball, which is actually a Pep Guardiola obsession. Sporting Lisbon made them pay over and over again, but It's not just them. You have seen it over and over again. So we can talk about individual players, and yes, Rodri's absence is huge. But there's something deeper here where they're really not good the moment they lose the ball and they leave themselves exposed. And then you add the fact that somebody like Erling Haaland has only scored once in the last 5 Premier League matches as well. So when they're relying on somebody that can maybe help them up front, that's not happening either. So Rodri's absence is massive. Kevin De Bruyne's continued absence, although he's back, that's also big. So there's a weird sort of transitional period that Manchester City are going through right now. And that's a big, big problem. So I think that, once again, the biggest issue for me is not necessarily what Man City do with the ball, but what they do without it. Having said all that, if they win against Brighton, they'll be top of the table, albeit for a few hours until Liverpool plays Aston Villa. But that's the margins that we're seeing here. So, yes, 3 straight losses. You mentioned, obviously, a 4th will be historically bad as well. But I think that they got to pay attention to what they do when they don't have the ball. But like Janusz said, out of those 3, Arsenal, Real Madrid, Man City, I'm concerned of City the least. That's not saying that they don't have issues.
Not only that, but I mean, you have 3 special coaches. You can even say that about Mikel Arteta. He's proven over time as a still, relatively young manager, right? That he knows what he's doing. I think this is Pep Guardiola. There's one manager that can find solutions that we can't even think of. Because with everybody else, we can kind of, go back and see what they may do. But as we know, Pep Guardiola can come up with somebody, you're going to have a defender playing up front, one of those. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but he's so capable of that. And as I've said, that squad, even with injuries, is so deep. And as we all know it, they've had slow starts. I mean, this year it's not won, at least the first few games. Now they're in that cycle, obviously, where they may be getting that out of the way, right? I mean, Arsenal's losing, Liverpool. I can bet you just about any money that they're going to have a purple patch as well, because that's just going to happen. So I wouldn't worry, simply because I have that much respect for Pep Guardiola and the solutions that he can come up with that we don't think about.
Someone's trying to get your attention, LME, outside your New York City apartment.
I'm coming. They're just.
Do you know, both of you, the last time that any Pep Guardiola team, but a Pep Guardiola managed side, lost 4 games in a row?
Never.
4.
Janusz?
Never.
Yeah, 4. I don't think that's ever happened.
Never. It's never happened. So this weekend is a big one for Pep and for Manchester City. Now, we're going to end with Arsenal, and we're going to combine this with the preview of Chelsea against Arsenal this weekend. So when we were speaking about Arsenal, we saw their defeats. Obviously, that was a poor one at Newcastle, and then they lost in midweek against Inter. They've dropped silly points. They drew at home against Brighton due to a lack of discipline. What's really changed? Is it simply Odegaard isn't there, albeit he's now back in training and could be involved this weekend in some stage? Is it a case of now Odegaard's back, everything's okay for Arsenal, or do the same problems rear their ugly heads? They don't score enough for the chances they create, Janusz?
It's both. I mean, think about it. Last year, I mean, of all the teams, they were relatively healthy. I mean, almost everybody played all the time. But yet, we've always said that some of the issues, I said it last year, I said it this year, even before, is that, the squad is not deep enough. And we see it now, because even though they dealt with the loss of Odegaard relatively well, you have to say, maybe up until recently, he just came back, played a few minutes. Obviously, this team is not the same without him. Saka is going to be much better the moment he steps on the field. So that's a massive bonus. But when you look at it, because of little injuries, you look at, Saliba's suspension. You look at, Calafiori, who came in and impressed right away. He's been out. I'm trying to think, who else is there? Timber's been in and out. Declan Rice been injured as of late, right? So when you look at that shows you that lack of depth in the squad in terms of quality, and they can't change that. And having to play in Champions League and Premier League, of course, with that is not easy. And combined with that, the continuous problem at number 9, because, even though it's been better with Kai Havertz, he is not number 9. He will never be number 9. If you're facing Arsenal, Kai Havertz is not the sort of player that's going to make you go, wow, right? And there's been so much talk about that number 9. If you look at Gyökeres, look what he's doing for Sporting against Manchester City recently, right? So a team that Arsenal has to face. And if you look at somebody like Osimhen at Galatasaray, look at that. I know there's a lot of money. I know it's not all that easy, but they haven't addressed that. And to me, perception sometimes is everything. And when I look at some of these games, and there are plenty of them where Kai Havertz doesn't look right. Trossard is never going to be that player that playing kind of 2. Sometimes Trossard is the number 9. It's just not going to happen. Trossard is great when he comes off the bench, occasionally to start. Martinelli, for me, still very young, but I don't know if he's developing as fast as everybody could see. So you have over-reliance on Bukayo Saka, and then with all the players missing significant number of games, key games, that's why we are where we are. Where, as I said, they lose this game to Chelsea, and I don't see a way back. You can do it against one team, but you can't do it against Liverpool and Manchester City with a 10 points loss.